Hello everybody, I'm Josh from battlechads and welcome to this Goryo's Vengheance deck tech deck breakdown. I'm going to spend a bit of time on this, uncover some of the stuff I've learned piloting this deck this season, my fairly good win rate with it and why I chose this deck and how I think it's a rewarding deck and how I think it's very fun and interesting and uber well placed, very, very powerful. And yeah, we'll get into it. So this is the list that I sort of fixed on towards the end of the season. Unfortunately, I didn't get my qualification, but I had 100% conversion rate into RCQ top 8s with 2 losses in finals. And this season I got 6 trophies, I think, playing this deck online. Unfortunately, I can't do any challenges and stuff. You don't really see me in challenges just because of the way my life is. I can't really dedicate hours and hours sat on my computer due to work, family life, all that good stuff. But I can get a league in here and there, and when I do all right. I do pretty well, pretty consistent. I'm very rarely I'm a negative sort of win-loss with this deck. When I first picked this deck up, one of the big challenges I had was sideboarding. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to go through sort of quick breakdown of the deck. I'm going to go through sort of different ways you can express yourself with the deck, how you want to play the deck, etc. Because there's a few different builds you can do it. I'm going to shout out some people who I've been following, especially results for builds, etc. And then I've got a list of 9 decks. I'm going to sort of go through how I sideboard. Sort of top decks you might see in the meta. I know it's towards the end of the modern season now. I know we're going into standard, but I think modern is still a relevant format. You know, if those in the UK who go to like mega moderns, or you know, in America you get big modern tournaments all the time. I think that this deck is a really good deck, and there's lots of, like I said before, lots of different ways to express yourself and how you want to play it. So I'm going to go over my list. I'm going to compare it to some other lists that are doing pretty well, who I think are still really relevant and are really viable, and then why I chose sort of this version of this deck, and why how other decks sort of differentiate in how you play. So the deck that I chose or finished towards the end, and I did a lot of tinkering with this, was the straight up Bant version. Now I think not Bant, Esper version, and I think Esper is where I wanted to be in my play style, because it was very controlly with a big finish, i.e. your big monster ephemerated big game winning threat with your secondary game plan of Psychic Frog. Now we'll just go into the main deck's sort of strategy. I did do a gameplay video on it on a previous episode in Chad Battles, but if you want to see sort of like more about on that on me playing it, then go check that out. But for now, I'll just do a quick breakdown. I'm going to look here because my computer screen's here for the thing. So the main strategy of this, of Goryo's Vengeance, for those who don't know, is you put a big fat creature into your graveyard with a big Gristlebrand or a Traxxas, and you bring it back with Goryo's Vengeance. Now, Goryo's Vengeance says return target legendary creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. That creature gains haste, so you get that immediate life swing because both the Traxxas and Gristlebrand have lifelink, and then at the beginning of your next end step, you exile that creature. Now, if you ephemerate that creature, or you consign that trigger will sort of fizzle, and you can keep the creature out indefinitely. Now, if you've got a Gristlebrand out, you can just keep drawing cards. If you've got a Traxxas out and you flicker it, then you get 20 cards, or you look at 20 cards and select different cards from them. So you can either combo off if you don't hit an ephemerate, or you can set up for a really big turn afterwards. And the way we get these monsters in the graveyard is a few ways. So one of the ways is Tainted Indulgence, so draw 2, then discard a card. Psychic Frog, if you have a fatty in your graveyard, you pitch it to your Psychic Frog. Apologies that these cards are in my collection because I rent when I'm not using the Chad Magic DB account. Or you can cycle it, or you can mill it through Philology Archaeologists. Now, if your Archaeologist is really good in this list, I'll explain why in a minute. But essentially, with the trigger on this, you can bin a fatty and get your Goryo's Vengeance at the same time if you're so lucky to do that. This version I really like because you have tons of interaction. You have Solitudes, for early interaction. Ragavan is a big issue for this deck, so having being able to answer a Ragavan really early is important. And also force negation, so you can do your broken stuff in their turn and have that force negation backup. You do have prismatic ending as well to back up that sort of low to the ground removal, but it also like it's also a catch-all for graveyard hate, pesky planeswalkers, pesky artifacts, etc. Low to the ground creatures, and then you got Thoughtseize as well to clear the way. But Thoughtseize can also be a pitch spell for yourself. So if you're struggling you've got a Goryo's Vengeance and a Fatty in your hand, and you're struggling to get the Fatty into the graveyard, you can Thoughtseize yourself, and then pitch that Fatty into the bin. Sideboard wise, we've got it depends. Obviously, it depends on what you want to face. This sideboard is attuned to more of an aggressive sort of meta. Lots of Boros Energy, the like. So I've got 2 Wrath of Skies, Celestial Purge, 2 Wrath of Skies to clear up most things, artifacts, creatures, all that good stuff. Celestial Purge, get rid of Blood Moons, Goblin Bombardments, Flages, all that stuff. Consign to Memory, if you're playing blue, then you play 4 Consign to Memories. In this deck as well, Consign to Memory has the secret text of almost an Ephemerate at home, because you can stifle your Goryo's trigger. 2 Mystical Disputes for your counter spell wars, 1 copy to Subtlety for creature matchups, 2 Fatal Pushes for, again, to bolster up your early interaction, and then Teferi if you're in a counter war sort of matchup, Slammer Teferi, then you don't have to worry about counter spells. Thinking your Murktide, your Belchers, etc. Pest Control, I've got 1 main and 1 side. Pest Control is another catch-all. You can sort of game 1, if the Boros Energy players go off with their silly Ocelot Pride turns, you can sort of clear the board, or against main board spell bombs or whatever, you can just clear them up. Construct tokens, all that good stuff. But also it cycles away, so if you don't actually need it in your main board, like it's not really a main board, it's not really a matchup for Pest Control, you can cycle it away quite easily and dig for your combo. Psychic Frog being the main sort of secondary game plan in this, you can quite easily land a frog or 2 and then just sort of run away with the game with them and hold the combo back. Let the opponent sort of waste resources on the frogs, etc., while you sort of have that trigger good to go. It's a bit more patient in this build's a bit more patient, a bit more controlly. And then you've got your Emperor Bones. I was on Late to Dinners as another reanimation target, but I went back to Emperor Bones because it was another threat, and it sort of put strain on the opponent's spot removal, so your Psychic Frog can survive basically. But you can also reanimate with Emperor Bones. You can hold the Solitude under it, so you can then have instant speed interaction late game, etc. So yeah, that's sort of the deck I was looking at. The mana base is a very clean Esper mana base. I'm not doing no silly land bases, no silly lands in this, in terms of like utility lands. 20 land base might seem not a lot, but you only really need 2 lands before you start hitting loads of land drops, because by the time you get a creature out, your Traxxas or your Griselbrand, you're gonna hit land drops. Playing 1 of each basic to try and keep you sort of insulated against Blood Moon effects. Against Harbinger of the Seas, it's not that much of a problem, because you just make sure you fetch your basic swamp and you're sort of good to go. Solitude's answer that. Blood Moon is a big issue in this deck. Shout out to Bax with Blood Moon be out my last RCQ on turn 2 with a Ragavan on the play. Annoying. This deck is playing 4 Surveil lands, so I've got the copy of Undercity Sewers, Meticulous Archive, as well as the Underground Mortuary for the black green source. Now it has 1 green source in this, because there are occasions when you do hard cast a Traxxas, especially in like your Murktide matchups, your grindy matchups, where there's a big resource game and holding up spell snares or whatever, and you just slam a bigger Traxxas. I'm just going to take a drink because my throat's a bit dry. So yeah, very clean mana base. 4 Surveil lands. They're essentially cantrips. It's essentially if you're fetching their turns, essentially consider. So yeah. Now the reason I'm playing 4 Archaeologists in this list, or in Goryo's Vengeance particularly, because I found that this was a great blocker into Boros Energy. It's also, if you can also have the text of, you know, when you mill your cards, if you don't pick any, it actually becomes a 1/4. Now 1/4, it puts strain on Galvanic Discharge, it puts strain on other removal, and it also it means it's a really excellent blocker against things like Ragavan, against things like Ocelot Pride, that sort of stuff. Yeah, that's why I sort of chose this. So this is what I would take. This version is what I would take into a quite an aggressive meta. Now, different ways to build this deck. I did say there's different ways to express yourself with this deck, and that tends to be in the flex slots of Falaji Archaeologist. Now, if we just move over, go to Energy Goldfish. There's a pilot called True Hero who's been doing really well with Sin, Spirits Punishment as their reanimation target. You know, you reanimate Sin, and then you can then copy an Atraxa or Gristlebrand in your bin, and that other permanent stays out. But then you can also, you know, attack for 7 with itself and get another trigger. Sin is interesting. I've not actually tried this list. It is interesting because the primary discard spell in this is Faithless Looting. So you can essentially Faithless Looting turn 1 and then turn 2 get a Sin out and then have a permanent Atraxa or Gristlebrand, which is a turn faster than my version I was playing. But what you'll notice with this version is that beyond Force Negation, there's no Solitudes in this list. So the early interaction is not really there. And I really like Solitude right now. I think it's, especially in the UK meta, where people like Murktides, people like, you know, Zoo, that sort of thing. I really like Solitude, so I chose to play that, and I really like at the moment Wrath of Skies. I think those two cards is what I wanted to play, and that's why I sort of kept with the Esper version. But this version is a lot faster. You're not playing Ephemerates in this version. You're playing Consign to Memories. Consign to Memory does the same job, which if you're expecting a heavy sort of grindy Eldrazi meta, that's really good because the main board sort of consigns there. Also, Consign to Memory is really good against the Flicker decks too. So if you're expecting that sort of meta, that's really good. A lot of lists now are playing Tamios instead of Falagis. Now, Tamio is, you might think, oh, this might not be a Tamio deck. However, if you look at the spells that they're casting, we're casting Tainted Indulgences, we're casting Faithless Lootings. You know, some lists are playing Faithful Mendings. This is a turn 2 flipped Tamio, which in itself is a win condition. So it's an additional win condition here. It's upped on the Emperor Bones. I've not tried Jace's Avenged Prodigy in these lists. I'm not sure if it's good or not. I've seen a few lists try it. People like it. I've not had the debate over it. I've not tried it myself, so I'm not going to comment on that. It does seem a bit slow to me. I think I'd rather be casting Falaji Archaeologist in the two mana spot, but that's me personally. With the red, it means that you've got different sideboard options. You know, this list that True Heroes playing Flame Venor, Colgan's Command. I'd love to see that card. And Pyroclasm. Now, you know, adding that red does mean that you've got different cards for different tools for different, I guess, metagames. So it's a metagame call. This list is just playing the sort of essentially the Grixis mana base, so it's not too hot, too vulnerable to a lot of Blood Moon effects, especially when you can utilize the red as well. But I've seen other lists playing the Domain package for Leyline Binding, etc. And I think the mana base, the weakness of this deck is definitely in the mana base. It's a really weak mana base, especially if you don't get the opportunity to fetch for the basics. So that's why I've sort of stayed away from 4 colours, but 3 colours I think is very safe, and this is playing the Jund. I've seen this list here that I just got up that did well in a challenge recently. It's playing Tamio. I've seen Priest of Felrites being played more. I've not played the card myself yet, so I'm not really going to comment on that, but I can see how it's good. You can unearth it at instant speed and then instantly get your creature out permanently. But this again is not running Falaji Archaeologist like I am. Still in the sort of Esper mana base for Wrath of Skies or Solitudes, all that good stuff. I really rate Solitude right now. Now, RVNG, I'm not sure I pronounce his name. He's sort of like the Goryo sort of master, as you were. Like, he's the sort of one I thought, oh, I saw his list and I thought, yeah, I need to try this for the season. he's running Phalange Archaeologist to much success. Like I said, I really like this card for lots of reasons, mainly because it's a blocker. It pressurizes removal. I mean, if this gets removed, whatever. And it also gives your Ephemerate extra text, because essentially if you Phalange Archaeologist and you don't hit anything, but you have an Ephemerate, so you've milled 3 cards from here, then you Ephemerate it, you mill another 3 cards, look for your combo, and then on the rebound of Ephemerate, mill another 3. Often enough, the play pattern will be turn 2 Phalange Archaeologist, bin a fatty, get a Goryo's Vengeance. Turn 3, Goryo's Vengeance, your fatty, Ephemerate that fatty, and then on the following turn, depending on the matchup, you don't really want to re-ephemerate your Atraxa or re-ephemerate your Griselbrand because you want to start attacking with it. But it gives you a solid ephemerate target because Archaeologist is still out, so you can just Archaeologist and draw an extra card. So it's actually a really good card advantage engine in that respect. So yeah, there's sort of like a few different ways how to build this deck. This is the way I like to build it. I've done really well, like I said, 100% conversion to top eight RCQs, 6 trophies, 2 finals in RCQs, fairly decent sized ones. So I've ran pretty hot this season, albeit not qualified, which is really annoying. But hey ho, that is Magic the Gathering. That is the RCQ system. That is the modern format. As exciting as it is, it can often be a cruel mistress. But yeah, I'll pause it here and I'll go with that now into some sort of sideboard and how I sideboard against different decks. So sideboarding with this deck then. Now, I particularly didn't include any straight up graveyard hate in this because I was thinking about, you know, the sort of graveyard decks there are now. You've got the Mirror, for example, which is awful. The playing the Mirror is not very good. I don't really like it, but you don't really see it that often because not many people are playing this deck. Because once again, I think that people struggle sideboarding with it until you sort of click with it and you understand. Oh, actually, yeah, this is how you sideboard. So I think a lot of times when people pick this deck up, they really like it game 1, and then game 2 and 3 it sort of falls off the rails for them. I'm not particularly playing any strict graveyard hate in the sideboard. Murktide decks, yes, they reanimate their Oculuses or they play their Murktides, but every one of them gets answered by Solitude. You know, your sort of Overlord the Bailmot decks, there's not really an opportunity to sort of stop them getting value off it until the trigger resolves. So I didn't really feel graveyard hate was that impactful there. And you know, there's not really many graveyard sort of decks that or graveyard strategies that you can't really deal with the tools that are already here. One of the reasons why I put Emperor Bones back in was sort of more respect for, you know, Flage. You can sort of get a Flage out of the bin or make it harder for your opponent to cast a Flage. Again, a Resolve Flage can still be answered by Solitudes, can still be answered by, you know, Prismatic Endings, etc. So, or even the damage is completely negated because you've just got an Atraxa out or a Griselbrand and you just can't keep up with the life swing or the life gain. So a lot of times, you know, I didn't really feel like dedicating sideboard slots to graveyard hate was relevant, but I think if I was to play some graveyard hate, I'd probably do Ghost Vacuum to add to that sort of grindy element, because that's the sort of games you would play, grindy sort of games, you know, take their things and eventually crack the Ghost Vacuum for a game winning value at the end. So the first deck I'm gonna talk about is Boros Energy. Now, bearing in mind that when we sideboard against decks, we always sideboard against a sideboarded version of that deck. Now, initial response, you would think, well, I'm going to board out Force Negations because they're a creature deck, and I'm going to board out the Thought Seizers because they're an aggro deck, and I completely agree. However, if you think with Boros Energy, they board in Blood Moons against us, they board in Celestial Purges against us, they board in maybe more Thraben Charms, or they have Thraben Charms, or they'll mulligan 2 Thraben Charms, or they might play their own Ghost Vacuums. It's all non-creature stuff. So I don't actually like boarding out all my Force Negations. So I'll board out 1 Force Negation and 2 Thoughtseize. The Thoughtseizes, obviously you want to preserve your life total, and you don't really want to help them sort of fill their graveyard full Flage if you can help it. I'm also boarding out on Emperor of Bones because I feel like Emperor of Bones is really weak against them, despite the fact that, yeah, it attacks the Flages. But I've spoke to a lot of Boros Energy players, a lot of really good Boros Energy players who board out Flages against us because it's not the sort of game plan that the sort of It's not the axis they want to fight us on, because they want to present low to the ground threats. Ragavan's really good against us, and then sort of control us so we can't get our fatties out, because they have a really hard time struggling. Once we do get a fatty out, they have a hard time struggling against it. You could also board out an Ephemerate if you wanted to, because even though Solitude Ephemerate is really good, they still keep in Galvanic Discharges, removal, etc., because Psychic Frog is still here, and they still respect the Emperor of Bones. You could actually take out the second Emperor of Bones as well, but I tend to just leave one in. What does come in against them is your Fatal Pushes, of course, your Wrath of Skies, and your Celestial Purges. There was a debate whether I bring in Subtlety against them, but I felt that, and Pest Control comes in as well. So in this instance, you could definitely, you could shave on your Emperor Bones as well. I tend to shave a fatty here because they bring in the Graveyard Hate, and you tend to not want to sort of lose 7 life, especially if they're holding a Goblin Bombardment, because they can, if they've gone off with their creature package and then they've played a Goblin Bombardment, you lose 7 life. They can get your life total quite low. So these 6 come out, these 6 come in. We're basically dealing with on the board stuff. We're making sure that we can sort of keep their nut draws at bay, and keeping in mind that their sort of interaction suite is non-creature. Essentially, we're keeping in force negations, but we want to keep their creature stuff at bay. We want to keep their on the board resources low, and we want to eventually just get them with a big fatty. One of the bigger things to play around is Thraben Charms, especially main board. So if you can play around Thraben Charm, make sure you do. Most lists are playing 2 main board. If you can play around it, then do it. Don't give them the opportunity to snipe your creature, because usually once you get that creature out, it's GG. Fatal Pushes for Ragavan, Wrath of the Skies for the creature packages, and then Pest Control for all their Ocelot Prides, Ragavans, weird tokens that they make, all that good stuff. This is how I like to sideboard against them. Psychic Frog is really good against them. It pressurizes their removal. So their removal can still deal with sort of Atraxas and Gristlebrand's, but they tend to rely more on their own Celestial Purges and stuff. So this is how I like to play against Boros Energy. When you play against Boros Energy, please, if you can, play around Blood Moon. Don't get locked out. Blue and black resources are the most important. Your white's sort of a nice to have. But you can function pretty well and win the game pretty well if you've got a black source or a blue source, black source, and especially black and blue source. So that's how I like to sideboard against Boros Energy. Like, one of the nutty draws, one of the things that you struggle to beat is on the play Ragavan into a turn 2 Blood Moon. This is why I like to keep in a force negation. Again, like I said before, we're playing to the post boards of a deck, not the main board of the deck. So yeah, a lot of times people will board out Force Negation, but I found it to be really good. Solitude is really good. Ephemerate, again, when you can Ephemerate Solitude, it's also really good, but it can sometimes be a dead draw, so that's why I like to shave it a little bit there. Essentially, though, you want to keep a fatty sticking, so I don't really like to go down more than 3 Ephemerates if I can help it. So that's how I sort of sideboard against Boros Energy. It's the biggest sort of meta share at the moment, and I feel like this deck has a really good matchup, but it's not free. Especially if you keep quite a slow hand and give them time to develop, or keep them time to draw answers to your stuff. You kind of want to be in a position where you control on the board, really slow them down, and then try and then burn them out. Flagy Archaeologist shines in this matchup because it's a really good blocker, taxes the removal, and even if you don't need the Goryo's Vengeance, you're bringing in all these non-creature spells. You're going to dig for an answer, you'll probably get it with a Flagy Archaeologist. So that's my Boros Energy. We'll go on to sort of Prowess now. So I'm talking about the blue-red Prowess deck with Corey Steelcutter. I really like Force Negations kept in because you want to make sure that they don't land the Goryo Steel Cutters. I really like Force Negations in. Celestial Purge is fine. Fatal Push is good. I don't bring in Wrath of Skies against them because I feel like it's just too slow. A lot of the creatures are 1 mana, so I do like Pest Control. Solitude shines here, really shines here, especially if you can ephemerate your Solitude. I do like to keep in my ephemerates against them because ephemerated Solitude is really good. There is an argument again for Subtlety, but I don't really like it. Emperor Bones, it just dies like Boros Energy. There's loads of bolts, that sort of stuff. You might think, oh, well, Emperor Bones is really good because it taxes their, it removes their delirium, all that good stuff. But if you're just answering their threats on the board, you're answering their Goryo Steel Cutter, you're answering the 1-drops, and you eventually get your big fatty out, they'll find it really hard to keep up with you. Again, I do shave a Gristlebrand because if you are taking 7 life to draw a card, especially if you need that ephemerate, it's really awkward because they can still burn you out in response. If you go up to 14 then back to 7, for example, that's a really dangerous game to play, especially if you don't find that ephemerate. So anything that taxes my life, I do like to shave up on a little bit because they are going to bring in some level of graveyard hate. You do want to keep a Gristlebrand in, so you still have a threat if they surgical extraction your Atraxa, for example. But this is another matchup where Psychic Frog shines because it's a big blocker. They don't really play any exile effects because they don't, unless they're playing white. So if you've got a big fat frog, then you're just going to close the game down. Phalange Archaeologist is really good here too because all the monk tokens can get blocked quite easily. The Swift Spears, and if it dies because of a block, then they've probably used some amount of resources into buffing their creature. So yeah, preserve your life total. That's where I am with sort of the sort of prowess side of things. Like I said before, Wrath of Skies it tends to be a bit too slow against them because this is essentially you need to get 2 white pips, and that can be painful for your mana base. So you're painful for your life total from your mana base. So I tend to want to fetch more basics here, which means that my spells are going to be a little bit more awkward to cast. But I think Pest Control is great here. It answers most of their threats apart from the Slick Shot Show Off, which can be answered with Fatal Pushes, can be answered with Solitudes, all that good stuff. So yeah, they're sort of the 2 premier sort of aggro decks that we sort of see in Modern at the moment, and I see that deck sort of like losing favour quite a bit. I don't think it's very good. I think it's a bit. I'm not sure if it's very good, to be fair. They do bring in a lot of blue spells, so you might think, oh, what about Mystical Disputes and all that good stuff? But I think that the blue spells aren't really powerful enough to warrant Mystical Disputes because they're usually spell pierces, that sort of thing, so you can sort of play around that. So I don't tend to bring them in. But yeah, this is how I sideboard against Prowess. The next deck on the list I've gone for is Murktide. Now, with Murktide at the moment, you don't really see the proper Kaito Orcish Bowmasters sort of version of the deck, which I think would be a better deck against us than the current Abhorrent Oculus version. Now, if you look at the Abhorrent Oculus versions of Murktide, they play a lot of... Well, it's playing mainly like spells, a lot of spells, but not really that many threats. They have four Psychic Frog, 4 Oculuses that they hope to unearth. Usually 2 Harbingers and then 2 Murktides, so the threats are really, really low. That means Solitude is great here because their eggs are all in one basket with their threats. Now, the sort of trick against the Murktide players is you want to mulligan less liberally here because you want to be making land drops. You want to be in a state where, you're making land drops. You're probably going to be casting your Atraxas, so you want to be fetching for your shadowy backstreets. You want to be sort of taking the game long. The longer the game's on, the more favourite it is for you because the more resources they're burning out, especially if they're thought scarring themselves and they're not getting the early eyes out. You can really take this game to the to sort of to the mid to late game, and it will favour you. But it's a resource battle. So how I like to sideboard then is, let's go back to the original version of this deck first and foremost. Okay, cool. So against this deck, Subtlety is really good because it's a flash threat, and if they go all in on Murktide, you can bounce it back to the hand. If they bounce back to the deck, if they go all in on hard casting and Oculus, Subtlety just puts all the work they did back into the deck, and they're probably going to bottom that because they'll probably need to find another threat or another way to fill the graveyard. So Subtlety comes in, Fatal Pushers come in because they're still Frog deck. You know, you still need to answer that card. Celestial Purge, there is an argument for it because it does answer their Frog, but to me, I think the Fatal Pushes and the Prismatic Endings and the Solitudes is enough of an answer to Frog to warrant it. Teferi definitely comes in, and Mystical Disputes come in. So you sort of want to, if you can land a Teferi against them, that turns off like 80% of their interaction. You know, they have essentially 2 removal spells that matter against you. Well, 1 removal spell that matters against you if they play Shoot the Sheriff or they play Shieldred's Edict. You know, that's essentially the only real answers they've got to your fatties. Yeah, sure, they can bounce it maybe, but you know that doesn't mean it means very little. There's only really one answer to it because they're probably going to board out, or they're going to keep the Fatal Pushes and stuff in because you're a Frog deck, but the Fatal Pushes and stuff doesn't really matter. It's the hand disruption and the stack interruption that it matters. Teferi helps along with that. So I'm bringing these 7s in. So what do I board out? So because it's a resource game, and you sort of ride on your Teferis and your sort of hand interaction stuff, I don't like force negations. I don't really like going against the card against the tempo matchup. I feel you really need to have cards in your hand making land drops and playing them. So that I tend to shave on your force negations. Pest Control is also really bad. It doesn't actually have any text against them. You could argue, yeah, you know, it can kill the manifested creatures from the eyeball, but to me, if that's the sort of game state you're in at that time, you're probably not really. I wouldn't say you're not winning that game, but you need more than a Pest Control to answer that. I also don't like Phalange Archaeologist in this matchup, mainly because it's a really grindy game. They're going to be bringing in the Hill Spell Bombs, potentially Surgical Extractions, potentially. What's that creature called? Bear with me. Bear with me a second while I find out the name of a card I've been playing for ages and I forgot the name of, as per my usual MO with battlechads. Bear with me. Empty Your Goldfish is great for when you're having brain farts like this because it's so easy to navigate. And this deck isn't even playing it. Essentially, your Night Day creature, I forget what it's called. Graveyard Trespasser, that's it. So you just stop thinking about the card that comes to your head. Graveyard Trespasser, so you don't really want to be having your animation targets in your bin as a target for any of their interaction. That being said, you could probably bring in Celestial Purge as well for the Frog if you wanted to even it out. Any rule of thumb with Phalange Archaeologist is if it's a Emperor of Bones matchup or it's a grindy matchup, you want to take that card out because you don't want to expose your graveyard unnecessarily. So this is how I like to sideboard versus Murktide. Now, the Subtlety is actually great here because Subtlety with Ephemerate is good because you can hard cast your Subtlety, and then if they go to cast their thing again or whatever, I've Ephemerated my own Subtlety before to sort of loop it, so they're constantly buying. So you're constantly buying time against a Murktide player. Again, the longer the game goes on, the more it favors you because beyond their eyeball, they don't really have any strict card advantage. But the longer the game goes on for you, the higher card quality you've got, the more card advantage you'll accumulate through Tainted Indulgences, through Frogs, through just reanimating something and gaining card advantage that way. So that's how I like to sideboard versus Murktide. Speaking of grindy matchups, we've got the black-white sort of flicker decks. Now, game one can be quite rough. Because, you know, they are a Solitude deck, they are an Emperor of Bones deck, and we are a Phalange Archaeologist deck. So, like I said before, Phalange Archaeologist, you don't really have a choice in in taking a creature out of the mill effect. You have to take a non-creature spell. So if you mill a Griselbrand or you mill an Atraxa and then they play an Emperor of Bones, that could be really bad for you, especially if you can't answer it. So I tend to not like them in this matchup. It tends to be your weakness game one. If you can early interact with the Atraxa, you know, and they don't have Solitude, it can be really good in terms of big explosive start because you get that card advantage, because it is a grindy matchup at the end of the day. You get the card advantage, you get that life swing, and then you can sort of get them. The deck, to me, the blue black white flicker deck, or the Esper deck, only really feels really problematic when they get the when they get the Overlord of the Bailmork out. Like the deck goes from being a pretty mid-range deck, but when you see Overlord of the Bailmork, it sends it next level. It sends it into overdrive. I think it's absolutely like mental, the difference between when they see that card and they don't see that card. So in this matchup, it is a heavy creature matchup, not very many non-creature spells, so Force Negation is probably the first thing that comes out. I also don't like Pest Control. It doesn't really have any text against them, and I don't like Phalange Archaeologist as well, because it is a Emperor Bones matchup, and Emperor Bones matchups tend to be bad for us. I also shave 2 to 3 Ephemerates, and I'll explain why in a minute. I'm going to shave 3 for this. I'll explain why in a minute. So when we bring in, I like to bring in 1 copy of Wrath of the Skies, just as like a catch-all. I like to bring in my Subtleties, because this can hit Overlord of the Bailmork. It can hit, well, they're a creature deck, so this hits pretty much everything. If you can take this, take a Solitude, you know, pitch this just to bounce a Solitude back to the top of the library, it's really good, because, you know, it means you've stuck a threat out for longer, whether it be a Griselbrand or whatever. I also really like Fail Pushes, because a lot of the creatures, you know, low to the ground. You know, the black-white version plays Orcish Bowmasters, it plays Felia. You know, you can hold a fetch land to kill something bigger. I also like to bring in 3 Consign to Memories. Consign to Memory is really good, because a lot of the stuff is ETB triggers, you know, flicker triggers, all that sort of stuff. If you consign to memory the Flicker Wisp trigger at end of turn, they'll permanently lose whatever they flickered. So I had a game once in a tournament where my opponent Feliared a Flicker Wisp, and the Flicker Wisp hit an Overlord of Bailmork. No, wrong. Essentially, it was 2 ATB triggers at the end of their turn. It was an Overlord of the Bailmork or something else, and I ended up consigned to memorying both of them, so it was like a 2-for-1 straight up, and it was a big tempo swing there. Celestial Purge is really good, because a lot of the stuff is black, and then 2 Teferis is really good, because well, they really struggle with Planeswalkers, and if you can turn off their instant speed sort of stuff, or bounce something back to the hand, a problematic permanent, that's really good for you. There's one other change I was gonna make, and I forgot what that was. It was on the tip of my tongue, teeth and the lips. Yeah, I think actually bringing all 4 Consigned to Memories in that instance, just because of, again, the way the deck is, and it's also your Ephemerate at home as well. So it's not a dead card. If it's not, like, I'm not sort of I'm not finding any value in stifling the triggers, but you will have this trigger that you'll need to stifle, and that's really good there. So that's how I like to board in against the black-white flicker decks. If they are playing Orcish Bowmasters, and you know they're playing Orcish Bowmasters, you may want to cut a Griselbrand for another Ephemerate or something, just because you don't want to be caught out by drawing 7 and then getting Orcish Bowmastered. So if you are playing Orcish Bowmasters, you might think, oh, I'm going to take out a Griselbrand just as insurance against that, because you don't want to be blown out. You don't want to go down to, you don't want to be on 14, draw 7, and just get blown out by an Oggish Bowmasters when you don't have a Solitude in your hand for no reason. So I do like to shave on that. Also, it means as well that if they do interact with sort of your reanimation stuff, or they stop you reanimating, or they thought seize it and they play an Emperor of Bones, you kind of don't want them to be drawing 7, because that sort of level of card difference isn't really gonna favour you in that matchup. Now, another sort of deck I've been noticing in paper particularly is Amulet Titan. Amulet Titan is a pain of a deck because the win condition is so convoluted. It's so out there. If you get a Titan player who's just pick up the deck, for example, or isn't really sure on what line to take, because I know there's various lines to take with that deck, it can be a sort of long time to sort of watch them go off, watch them winning. They might present sort of lots of action, but they don't actually know if they've won yet because of the way their analyst sort of win condition goes. So it's a bit of a weird one. However, I do think we are fairly favoured in that matchup. So we want to bring in as much interaction as possible, but the correct interaction. Now, I don't really like pest control against this matchup, and you might think, well, Amulet's 1 mana, and their sort of constructs can be answered by the constructs, etc. Yes, however, it doesn't answer Spelunking, it doesn't necessarily answer 6s, it doesn't answer all this other problematic stuff that's going on, and it doesn't straight up kill Urza Saga early, where if you have Wrath of Skies, for example, turn 2 Wrath of Skies will kill their Urza Saga, which I think is really important. So let's just go back to the deck's original function. So against Amulet Titan, I really, really like Subtlety. I really, really like Consign to Memories. I really like Wrath of Skies. There is somewhat an argument for Teferi in terms of you can bounce a problematic permanent, but I think if you're doing that, especially if you're bouncing Spelunking, they're going to get value off it when they replay it. Their amulets, they're so cheap they can just replay them. I'm not really a fan of that. So these are the 7 cards I'm bringing in. What I'm taking out then is I'm keeping in my Thought Seizers. Every time I bring Consign to Memory, I do shave Ephemerates. I think Ephemerate isn't that good in this matchup. You're not really going to be double Solitude in stuff, even though Solitude is really good against Titan itself, and you can nab numerous copies of Titan with it. But if they're starting to copying Titans with however they do it, it's not really a game you're winning necessarily. Pest Control I'm bringing out. I'm keeping in Force Negations. I'm keeping in Phalange Archaeologist because I want to turbo out my combo. But I'm actually shaving either 1 to 2 Psychic Frogs. Now, Psychic Frog, you might think, oh, this is one of the best cards in the deck. It's your secondary game plan. But Psychic Frog, if all you're doing against Amulet Titan is you're playing a frog and playing another frog, and it's getting blocked by the monkey all the time, Arboreal Grazer, and you have to pitch cards into it just to get through. You're very rarely just drawing cards with Psychic Frog in the Amulet deck, and you need to get them dead before you're not going to flood. Well, I'm going to say this properly. So you're not going to flood them with card advantage before if they can get a Titan on you. If they get a Titan out or they go off, they can just win you on the spot. It's not a card advantage matchup. It's get them dead matchup. So I shave 1 to 2 frogs in this matchup. I don't really like frog in this. I made the mistake of keeping frogs in over Phalange Archaeologists, but I just think you just need to turbo that combo out. The Graveyard Hate is mainly Paducah Bog, and again, do it in their turn. They can sort of have shenanigans where they're copying it from the graveyard with whatever land it is. I forget what it's called. But you don't really want to be. You not really want to be in that sort of. you can just once that effect's happened, you can just recock and go again with Vengheance Archaeologist, whether it be playing another one, whether it be ephemerating it or whatever. You can sort of keep on top of them with that. You can shave one if you wanted to, because it's not as aggressive, and it's not as sort of the blockers doesn't really matter. So shaving one is something I usually think about. But it depends how fast you want to go. So this is sort of how I sideboard against Titan. I really like Emperor Bones still, because it can protect if you have a fatty in the bin and you play an Emperor Bones, you can actually protect your fatty under Emperor Bones, because they might not necessarily bring in that many dismembers against you, and if they do, so be it. It is still a Psychic Frog game, but we're cutting Psychic Frog, so let the dismembers rot in their hand. Solitude is really good against them. Prismatic Ending can take a problematic permanent. Thoughtseize can strip the hand. This is sort of how I'm looking for this a sort of fighting amulet there. Force Negation really good early on to stop them for the early amulets, etc. So that's how I am with Titan. Problematic matchup, but it's one of the few matchups we actually board out Psychic Frog for. It's not the best, I don't think. If you like Psychic Frog into a Boreal Grazer, then all power to you, but it's not for me. Not for me. Okay, so the sort of another deck I've been looking at is Belcher. Now, Belcher's one of those sort of decks that was massive when One Ring was around, because it was the sort of answer to a heavy Boros meta. Boros was playing One Ring, so the only other thing to do was completely ignore what the Boros players are doing and just get the player dead. And Belcher did that very well. And from that legacy, you'll always get Belcher players. Now, I think our deck is a lot better game 2 and 3 against Belcher, particularly the fact that we're bringing in a lot of counter spells, a lot more interaction. Our Solitudes that don't have much text, our Prismatic Endings aren't the best because they don't really do anything in your turn, in their turn to pass priority, where you're casting Prismatic Endings at sorcery speed. So, as we said before, their main win con is their sort of artifacts, that sort of stuff. And their main interaction is on the stack. Well, their only real interactions on the stack interaction. Do have some bounce effects, etc. But we're not going to really play around that. So against them, I'm sort of shave. Well, I'll tell you what I bring in first. So I bring in 4 Consigned to Memories, that's for sure. I also bring in Teferis, great against them. It pretty much turns off most of their interaction. And there is an argument for Subtlety. Now, we'll talk about Subtlety in a minute, because Subtlety has a place in this deck, believe it or not. So things I like to keep in, or things I like to take out. Just say, where is that card gone? There it is. So Prismatic Ending isn't the best against them. Yeah, you might think, oh, they'll answer the amulets or whatever. I was like, sure. However, if they're doing that and they're passing turn, they're probably not winning that. They're probably not going to be winning there and then. So you've got time to basically kill them. So Prismatic Ending, I'm not the fan of. I do shave on some Solitudes because, again, you might think, well, we're going to kill their own archaeologists or their own sort of stuff, so they can't flare denial you. But again, is that the real gameplay you want to be playing against a combo deck like this? Solitude Short's a flash threat. It can have certain amounts of text, but I don't think it's where we want to be. Pest Control is not very good against this matchup, and again, we're bringing in Consigned to Memories, so we're shaving some Ephemerates. Now, with Subtlety, it's a weird one, because it is a flash threat. It can interact their sort of early creature turns where they might be digging for a land or something. It can affect that. Oh, wrong. And I also need to bring in Mystical Disputes. We'll talk about this in a minute. So, with your Subtlety, there is an argument for it, because one of their alternate game plans is to get the Tezzeret out and then sort of bypass Consign to Memory by Tezzeretting out their Goblin Char Belcher. So that sort of answers that. But I think that if you've got Teferis and you've got Mystical Disputes, etc., you got a real good chance at fighting them on that axis. Psychic Frog is really good. So the way to beat this deck is to get an early clock. So that's why I like to keep an Emperor Bones. Psychic Frog is really good. If you land a Psychic Frog and then you're just drawing a card every turn, pitching literally anything unnecessary, anything that isn't a distraction, pitch a Psychic Frog to lower the clock, then that's good. I like to keep in Phalange Archaeologists against them. This is a controlling matchup, sure. So you might want to not, because I always say like grindy sort of controlling matchups, you take out Phalange Archaeologist. But in this matchup, you kind of want to fish for interaction and fish for your combo to just get them dead. So that's why I like to keep them in there. Plus it also pitches to Force Negation for your blue count, etc. And that's sort of where I am with Belcher. If you did want to bring in the subtlety because of what I said before, then a Phalange Archaeologist is something you can cut to bring subtlety in for the Tezzeret plan, for a flash threat, etc. And that's sort of where I am with Belcher. So I'll just set my deck back to the way it was. There we go. There or thereabouts. Cool. So we've talked about 6 decks now. I've got another 3 I want to talk about. One of them being Broodscale. Now, Broodscale is a tricky one because they can just kill you out of nowhere. Now, the Broodscale combo is interesting because, you know, you might think, oh, well, we've got Consign to Memory, we've got, you know, Solitude, all that good stuff. But they have, because of Urza Saga, it creates this new level of dynamic, which is really hard to sort of, you know, they have main board graveyard hate against you that they can fetch through Urza Saga. They have Vexing Baubles, which means that you turns off your Solitude, it turns off your Force Negations. So you kind of need to leave open mana, especially if they land a Broodscale. However, your board wipes are really good against them, and so is your sideboard. So I really like, you know, your things like your pest control against them to really to get away or to kill all their little scions and stuff for the mana acceleration. Because the one way they're probably going to kill you is through an Emrakul, or the Emrakul trigger anyway. But this is one of those matchups. This is like a grinding matchup. One of those matches where you probably don't want to see your archaeologists. So against Broodscale, I'm bringing in Pest Controls. I'm bringing in Wrath the Skies. I'm bringing in all my Consign to Memories. Now, Consign to Memories mainly for sort of triggered stuff. Urza Sagas, because they will be bringing in Cavernous Souls. You can't necessarily counter the Eldrazi, but I tend to want to keep. I want to attack. I want to be like attacking the sort of mana generation. You know, if they're playing, some of them play Mycospawn, I want to be triggering those triggers. I forget the name of the other big Eldrazi, the green red one that makes Scion tokens on cast. You want to be stifling those sort of triggers because they really need to be casting. They really either want to get to the Emrakul mana or they want to be casting a big K command, which you need to stop. I also like to keep an Emperor Bones against them because it eats away their graveyard, so they find it harder to cast their Emrakuls. So what I'm boarding out against them, bearing in mind that we need to be playing around Vexing Bauble, or be aware of Vexing Bauble. I'll bring in Fatal Push against them too. So Force Negation is fine because, you know, you want to kill you want to Force Negation the Blade of the Blood Chief. You want to Force Negation a lot of their sort of K commands in their turn, a lot of their artifacts, etc. But it's not the best. We'll talk about shaving them in a minute. But I do like to shave first and foremost archaeologists in this. It's not the sort of gameplay I want to play. They'll play graveyard hate in terms of sort of like artifacts and stuff, so they'll just wipe your graveyard anyway. You don't really give them an opportunity to do that. Archaeologist comes out, so essentially you want to answer the graveyard hate and then go for the combo. We're bringing in Consign to Memories, so guess what? I like to shave on ephemerates because it's essentially doing the same job. Oh, is that 7 in? So I need to find another 2. So I like to keep an Emperor, as I said before, because of the fact that, you know, it reduces their graveyard, you know, so that it's harder for them to cast Emrakul. Force Negation is a bit of a weird one because you want to answer the creatures, but they play K commands, they play the artifacts and stuff, but I'm still shaving at least one Force Negation. The Solitude is good, especially if they don't have Vexing Bulb allowed, because then you can still answer their Broodscales. You can still answer big Eldrazi's, whatever, all that good stuff. And I'm also gonna take out a Fatty Orb to sort of smooth out my draws, play around their graveyard hate a little bit, and be more on a controlling, attack them on a more of a control and axis. You know, try and land a frog, try and draw some more cards, and eventually find the right moment then to kill them before they combo off. This is sort of how I'm sort of sideboarding against Broodscale. There is sort of... Teferi might also be good here because they're not K commanding in your turn. You can bounce problematic permanents and stuff, but I would just tend to just sideboard that on vibes, depending on how the player's playing. So Eldrazi Ramp now. So Eldrazi sort of... Not the aggro version, but the ramp version. So the green... green red piles, green blue piles that you might see. Obviously knocking around. We like Consigned to Memories against them. There is one argument for like things like Wrath of Skies and Pest Control and stuff. I don't know what my fail push is doing there. Wrath of Skies stuff to take away that sort of low to the ground, sort of you know, their mana acceleration or their scions, etc., but tend to be not the best. But Consigned to Memory is really good. I also really like Teferi in these matchups because, again, you can bounce problematic permanents. You can also switch off their instant speed interaction with K command, all that good stuff. And in this matchup, I tend to, if I can sort of consign to memory a mana acceleration, like one of their early sort of amulets or something, I will tend to do that. Or if I can prismatic ending a growth spiral or something, I'll tend to do that because you're buying yourself time and putting them off their sort of mana acceleration. You know, if they've got loads of fatties in their hand and they can't cast them, that's sort of a good place for you. So yeah, I tend to board out. Well, this is what I want to bring in. Board out then. Same rule of thumb. We're taking out Consigned to Memories. That means Ephemerate's not good. Solitude isn't the best here because, yeah, they play big fatties, but you don't really care that much. Pest Control isn't the best either. So you're kind of on this sort of, again, control plan, but also trying to get under them with the Psychic Frogs and the Emperor of Bones and give yourself a window to then kill them with your combo. If they're playing a lot of sort of Scions, that's those sort of builds, like they rely on more sort of like accelerating with Scions, etc. There is a argument for Pest Control. There is an argument for Wrath of the Skies, especially because they might bring in Trinispheres, all that good stuff against you. But that's why I kind of like Teferi, because you can sort of answer Trinisphere, you can sort of answer that stuff. You know, you still got main board prismatic endings. I like to keep in against their problematic artifacts and stuff. But yeah, that's all sort of sideboard against Eldrazi Ramp. And the last deck I want to talk about in terms of sideboarding is Zoo. Now, Zoo is one of those decks I've actually struggled with the most. Now, a lot of the reason comes down to the fact that they can play one game-winning threat, whether it be a Kavu, whether it be Scion of Draco or whatever, and you find it really hard to sort of... You don't necessarily find it hard to answer that threat or to keep up with that threat, but it's the interaction around it. You know, they play a ton of... they play Mystical Disputes out the sideboard. They play a ton of a ton of sort of like 1-mana counter spells backed up with the creatures. They play a lot of interaction that's kind of hard to deal with, and I've noticed a few black sort of versions of Zoo now playing things like Surgical Extraction, playing things like Thoughtseize sometimes. It's a real soup of answers and problems. Now, I've struggled in how to sideboard against Zoo because at first I was like, well, take out my Force Negations, which I think is correct, but then I'm losing to their non-creature stuff. And then I'm thinking, well, maybe I bring in interaction, all that good stuff, but then I'm losing to Scion and Leyline sort of combo, and I'm really struggling to keep up with that. So it's really struggling how I actually answer this deck. So I've come up with a little sideboard plan that I think I want to do. Now it's an aggro deck, so I'm keeping in Phalange Archaeologists because they do play Ragavans. I am taking out Force Negations and I am taking out Thoughtseizes. Thoughtseize could have text here because even though they you sort of want to strip the hand of any interaction, Thoughtseize still puts strain on your life, and now they can just burn you out of nowhere. You know, they play Tribal Flames to burn you 5 bolts. They have tons and tons and tons of burn in their deck, so you kind of want to preserve your life total. So take out Thoughtseizes, take out Force Negations. Now, I've been trying to Fairy in this matchup, and I quite like it because it bounces the Leyline, it stops their interaction, and it buys you a turn if they have to attack the Fairy. So I've been trying to Fairy in this matchup, and I've actually quite liked it. I also... Oh, sorry, Pest Control is really bad in this matchup too. I also like Consign to Memory because you want to stop their Leyline triggers, you want to stop their... Sign of Dracos, you want to counter them, all that good stuff. I really like Fatal Push as well for their Kavus, and I also really like Subtleties and Celestial Purges, all to answer the ley lines, to answer their problematic permanents that you'll see. Now, because this is a sort of burn matchup, I do take out a Gristlebrand because, you know, again, you don't want to be caught out by, you know, losing 7 and then getting burnt out. And then because we are bringing in our Consign to Memories, our Ephemerate, we do shave them. Now, I do like to keep in one Ephemerate because the Solitude can be really good against them, especially if you can Ephemerate it. But because they play a lot of bolts, because they got Leyline Bindings, your Ephemerate kind of sort of dies to Solitude. Your Solitude sort of dies when you Ephemerate stuff, so you sort of down card advantage there. But yeah, this is how I like to board out. So Teferi's in, Consign to Memories in, Fatal Pushes in, Subtlety in, and Celestial Purge in against Zoo. And that is the sort of 9 decks I've chose to sort of talk about. I'm open to, you know, conversation on how we on other matchups you want to sideboard against, or if you've got any comments on me. I don't think you should sideboard against this because of this reason. This is sort of like how I've sort of figured it out, how I've gone about. There are sort of like talks about on the play, on the draw sort of sideboarding. Now, usually that's in the form of Tainted Indulgence and Psychic Frog. You know, Psychic Frog is much better on the play than Tainted Indulgence. You know, if you're on the play, keeping Psychic Frog and then shave a Tainted Indulgence. If that's sort of magic you wanna look into, you know, if you're struggling to, if you like a card in a certain matchup, it's like, well, I'm on the play, so okay, I'm on the play. That means Tainted Indulgence is worse than Frog, so take out a Tainted Indulgence, or Frog on the draw isn't as good, so keeping a Tainted Indulgence, etc. That sort of give you an extra space. When I had 21 lands in this deck, so I was playing a 21 land version, part of my sideboard plan was to take out a fetch land in certain aggro matchups to go down to 20 lands, but I just don't think you want to be going down to 19 in this. You will need to be seeing your second land drops. But yeah, I'll just do a quick sort of finishing up overview, and then I'll sort of end it there.
So I just want to talk a little bit about mulliganing and what hands to keep, etc. With this deck, it mulligans really well. But it doesn't mean that you always have to mulligan, say, 1 land hands, for example, because we're running 4 Surveyor lands, so essentially we've got our cantrips within our fetch lands, and you only really need to hit the second land drop to really go off. Not only that is, you've got tons of sort of 0 mana interaction, you've got, you know, your Thoughtseizes, you've got your Prismatic Endings, you've got really low to the ground sort of interaction with this particular build, and that's why I like this build, because it is essentially a control/combo deck for this build. You know, we're not necessarily going turn 1 Faithless Looting, putting something in the bin and try and go off turn 2. You're trying to get a turn 3, turn 4 sort of reanimation spell while keeping your opponent's threats or opponent's interaction at bay. So what I'll do is I've got my mana traders account up here. I'm just gonna draw a sample hand and see if we'll keep it. So this hand is a weird one because you do have your turn 1 Surveil land. You don't really have anything to pitch your Solitude, but you really you really sort of wanting to hit with these Tainted Indulgences. Now I'd be tempted to mulligan this hand honestly because it's not really doing anything. It's not really doing anything this hand. It's just sort of deck sort of playing with itself to try and hit and get lucky essentially. So I would probably take this on the draw. If I was against like Murktide or something like that, or a really slow, dirtly sort of deck, I'd be tempted to keep this just because, or against a control deck, just because, I've got time to find my stuff. I can really sculpt a hand with this. So that's what a mulligan looks like. So yeah, this is a great keep because I've got my early blocker that actually enables my game plan. All I need to do is get a fatty into the bin. I've got my Goryo's Vengeance. This is actually a great hand, so keep that. Again, you do have the early interaction. You are riding Hardness Archaeologist to sort of find your combo pieces, but especially if you're on the play here, Psychic Frog on the play with a 0 mana interaction is actually really good. I would probably keep this hand. Let's see what Mulligan looks like. Just out of curiosity, much worse. So really early interaction. We could actually stick a Solitude here. You've got your Tainted Indulgence, you've got your turn 1 Surveil land. Yeah, I like this hand. All you need for this hand to go off is a fatty. Whether you draw it through Tainted Indulgence or you draw it naturally, you can sort of go off from this. Another great hand in terms of if it's against like an aggro deck of some sorts, you've got your early blocker. Phalange Archaeologist is probably going to hit something here. Whether it be a Tainted Indulgence, a Thoughtseize, or even the Goryo itself, and try and draw a discard outlet. I think this is a really great hand to sort of like find your combo pieces and essentially find a discard outlet for this and your Goryo's Vengeance. So this is one of those ones where it's one land hand. It does have early interaction, Prismatic Ending, or as a turn 0 interaction, and does have the Archaeologist. But the fact that this isn't a Surveil land is a bit of a problem. I'd be tempted to keep this on the draw, but on the play, I'd probably shuffle this. This hand is all right in terms of you've got early interaction and you've got a turn 2 Frog, but it's not really doing anything in the game plan. If you want to untap with this Frog, you do a protection with Ephemerate. Notice with Frog though, if you do Ephemerate, it'll lose all the counters, so you're probably not going to be pitching aggressively with Frog in this deck unless that is sort of game plan to win the game. Just because I want an Ephemerate to protect my Frog, but Frog is essentially just finding you bits for your combo. It's not as like aggressive as you would say like a straight up sort of Murktide Frog deck or Esper Blink deck where you really want to discard to your Frog to win, to close down the game. You really want to be finding your combo to close down the game here. You do have both your combo pieces here, but you have nothing else going on, so this is an instant mulligan. Again, this is a really poor hand. It has nothing going on, as I would mulligan to go down to 5. Obviously, this is not doing the... I don't know why this is not doing the London mulligan, but hey-ho. But if we had a new 2 cards here, say this was a land and whatever, I would probably keep this, ship back the Solitude and probably the Emperor Bones if we have another land here, and then just try and find your Goryo's Vengeance through your Tainted Indulgence, Crystal Brand on a mulligan to 5. Great hand. Absolutely. So you start off with Meticulous Archive. You've got your early interaction if you need it in Prismatic End, and say they lead with a Bragavan or something. You can actually use your Godless Shrine and then go off the turn later. But Meticulous Archive into Frog, discard your Griselbrand, untap Goryo's Vengeance. Great, does exactly what the deck wants to do. One land hand that isn't a that isn't a Surveil land. Honestly, I'd be tempted to keep this on the draw, but on the play, I'd probably send this back. Send this back, no lands. Probably, I know this is missing another 2 lands, but if this was like 2 lands here, I'd be probably shipping back the Force Negation and an Archaeologist, and riding hard on your Philargy there. Has your mana, has early interaction, has a turn 2 frog. This is a keep. Weird one. So you can actually do turn 1 Thoughtseizing as turn 2 frog with a Solitude backup. You're riding hard on the frog here. This is a frog game plan. Probably keep, depending on the matchup. Yeah, probably keep. 1 land hand. Okay, so this is a 1 land hand, but this has tons of potential. So on the draw, I'd be keeping this all day. On the play, I'd be riding really hard on the Surveil land here. Play the Surveil land. I'd be binning anything that isn't a land. But tons of potential on this hand. This hand is screaming potential to me. It'd be great if this Ephemerate was a land, but again, you'd be keeping a lot of 1 land hands in this deck, believe it or not. Let's mulligan just out of curiosity. Probably a better hand, so all this needs is a Goryo's Vengeance, really, to go off. You've got your turn 2 frog, you've got your early interaction with Prismatic Ending if you need it, and you've got your Surveil lands to try and dig a little bit further. I'll do one more. So this hand is fantastic because you've got your Philargy Archaeologist. All you need to do is find a discard outlet. Now you have 4 frogs, 4 Tainted Indulgences, 2 Thoughtseizers as your discard outlet. Bearing in mind you can't take a frog with your Philargy Archaeologist, but you can definitely Surveil into something. You know, your Archaeologist has got 6 hits here. Plus, it's itself is protecting your life total because it's a great blocker, and then your Emperor Bones is potentially might lead your Emperor Bones if it's like against an Eldrazi matchup or ramp or something where you can try and get under them to try and give them that pressure. That's Mulligan at Curiosity. Weird hand because, believe it or not, the basic planes is really awkward because if you get like land basic planes, you can't cast your Tainted Indulgence on 2, you can't cast your Psychic Frog on 2. Blue-black is really like the baseline of this deck. The white is sort of want to be like your 3rd colour. Pretty much similar to the others. You've got essentially your combo here. You've got early interaction. You are riding hard on the Surveil land, but if you don't hit a land, say, for 2 turns here, you're probably okay. And the chances of you surveilling and then drawing land within the first 2 or 3 turns is pretty high. Even if they go off, say if you decide to keep your pest control in your hand and you haven't pitched it to Solitude, if they go off, say like an awkward Osalt Pride, broken sort of early turn, then you can sort of get back the initiative by pest control and everything. So yeah, just definitely keep it cute. Let's mulligan Curiosity. We'd have to mulligan this again. Yeah. I don't know why it's doing the old mulligan here with the 6, but another probably 1 land keep where I would actually keep. You've got your discard outlet. You do need your Goryo's Vengeance, but you do have early interactions as a Force Negation Solitude. So you've essentially got somewhat of a force of will in your hand here because you can pitch Solitude and Force. You can pitch Solitude with a Traxer or Force Negation with a Traxer. So you sort of covered on a lot of bases there. Weird hand. If this had a land in it, I'd probably be tempted to keep because of the amount of interaction, but yeah, it's not as strong as the previous one. All we need is we got a discard, so we can actually Thoughtseize ourselves. Probably wouldn't lead on the Thoughtseize target myself. I'd probably hold the Thoughtseize here, depending on the matchup. I was against like a combo deck or something where I know I've got time. I'd probably lead with the Thoughtseize on them to make way for a Emperor Bones threat. But essentially, you do have your discard outlet. All you need here is a Goryo's Vengeance. Yeah, another great hand. You know, this is an example where you can lead on Philargy Archaeologist and then ephemerate the Philargy Archaeologist to see 9 cards in your deck. So all you need here is a discard outlet or actually on your Philargy Archaeologist actually binning a threat. So hopefully that was like useful and sort of what you would keep. Don't be scared in this deck to keep a 1 land hand. You are riding hard on your Surveil lands quite a bit. And if you are fearing that the game sort of will go long, you probably want to be fetching for your green Surveil land at some point. It's a weird one with the green Surveil land because sometimes I've surveilled and it's been my top card. I'm like, oh, do I bin this green source, my only green source, if this is a long grindy game? And oftentimes I've regretted binning it, because I've got a Gristlebrand, an Attraction in my hand that I could hardcast, and you do hardcast Attraction in this deck quite a lot, just because of how controlly and interactive it is, and depending on their sort of interaction suites, they could be holding up 3-bin charms, or they could be holding up Cling to Dust or something, and they just can't play around a hardcast Atraxa, especially if like they're holding up like Spell Pierce or Force Negations or something like that, and it can just get, believe it or not, under them with the 7-drop. That sounds weird, but yeah, hopefully that was hopefully that'll give you a bit more understanding of what I would keep and what I would mulligan.
So that's sort of like my sort of Goryo's Vengeance attempt. Now, I apologise if this video seems a bit everywhere, but I'm new to sort of the 1v1, the one-on-one content, looking at that's camera, looking at yous, well, not looking at yous, but talking to yous. But I hope you enjoyed this sort of explanation into a bit of Goryo's and how I love this deck, the ways to express yourself through this deck, the ways to build this deck. Like, you know, the core of the deck of reanimating a big fatty is very, very powerful, and it does leave room to sort of express how you want to play your different play styles, whether you want to play your Tamios, you want to play Flagio Archaeologist or not, you want to play sort of different colours, you want to go into the domain colours. There's all different ways to express yourself with this deck, and I think if you have a good understanding of the meta you want to play this into, or you have a good plan in how you want to execute this deck, I think it's really rewarding. I think it plays some really exciting games. I think it can win out of nowhere. You know, the amount of times I've top decked a Flagio Archaeologist and milled exactly a fatty and a Goryo's Vengeance just to win the game out of nowhere, and your opponent's like, oh. And you can also juke your opponent as well because of the Esper mana base. You can look like you're playing Esper Frog. You can look like you're playing just a Blink deck. You know, and then all of a sudden, you know, you play your Frog, and then all of a sudden he goes to Fatal Push it or tap out, and then you just, in response, discard and tracks it, untap Goryo's Vengeance them out of nowhere, and you're like, oh, that's what you're doing. It is called Instant Reanimator because you can do a lot of things at instant speed. When I play this deck, it's very reminiscent of my time when I was playing a lot of Team of Rhinos with Violent Outburst. You know, you do a lot of nasty, unfair stuff in their turn, which is exactly what I want to be doing. Yeah, I just really love this deck. I think it's really rewarding. I think if you haven't tried it already, you should try it. I'm pretty obsessed with this deck, to be fair, because usually I'm those who know me, I'm like a blue-black Frog diehard, and my psychic, my you might be able to hear something in the background, by the way. I apologize for that. My modern deck start with Psychic Frog and then bleh. Like, I just love that card so much, and I think this is well and truly a Psychic Frog deck, and well and truly a attacks on an axis that is it's really open in the modern. It's really open to abuse in the modern format as a moment. Well, towards the end of the season anyway. But I hope you enjoy, or I'm looking forward to anyway, playing some Standard, especially the rotation this month. I'm really looking forward to explore there. So hopefully we'll do a few more of these. Any feedback on this, I'm appreciated, because it's my first time sort of doing this sort of video, deck tech wise. So any feedback, I'd be greatly appreciated. And thanks for watching, and I hope this was useful. Check out the podcast, Battlechads. We're over on Spotify and here on YouTube. Give us a follow, like, a support. We have some cool guests on. We are sponsored by, Chad Magic, and also we're sponsored by UltraPRO. UltraPRO have really great products, and yeah, we're really supportive partners with them. So check them out, and check out Chad Magic too, who do a lot of sort of commander stuff, if you like that sort of thing. Dirty commander players. But, you know, it's really fun. I recommend the episode they did with Howling Salt Mine. That was my favourite episode. It was so funny. But yeah, cheers guys, and thanks for watching. Bye.